Macartney is a burnout recovery and prevention specialist. As a former consultant and project manager turned coaching psychologist, Wendy is all too familiar with burnout herself. In fact, this is exactly what prompted her to leave her job in consulting and dedicate her career to working with people. She's currently combining her role as a senior people partner for a large financial institution with what she fondly refers to as her side hustle, Burn Bright. True to the spirit of this show, Wendy is a brilliant example that you can successfully combine more than one passions at the same time and make a living out of it. In this episode, she shares her fascinating story together with some practical tips on how to spot the early signs of burnout, deal with challenging colleagues, and get the energy to perform without pushing harder and harder. Burn bright, not out.
And people say things to me, and managers will say to me, well, this person's not performing. I'll say, well, just stop a minute. Were they performing before? What's happened? And then I'll have that conversation with them to say, okay, what's going on? And then 9 times out of 10, I'm referring them to a psychological support outside the organisation. And then the vast majority, I would say 90%, make a full recovery and back at work, performing in 6 months.
How are you today? So pleased to have you as a guest on the show.
Fabulous to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, and obviously when our listeners listen to this podcast, they will have heard the intro and a little bit about what you're doing on at the moment. But I still always love to give that opportunity at the beginning for you to just introduce again, Burn Bright, what the ideas behind it and how that concept started, because I know that that's what you're probably focusing on at the moment.
So I probably experienced burnout a couple of times in my life, and I began to see trends of other people burning out, particularly neurodiverse people like me. And I thought, there's more in this. So I retrained as a psychologist and studied and researched burnout for 5 years, where I looked at nutritional aspects, sleep aspects, anxiety aspects, and conducted a lot of research on insomnia as well, and how that starts and how it progresses. And I began to see trends and patterns and started to do tests with myself and other people on how can we identify burnout at the very early stages and you can recover in 2 to 4 weeks, and how can you recover quicker when you've got extensive burnout. So that extensive burnout is when you've just psychologically detached from work and you're absolutely exhausted.
So what is the actual definition of burnout? Because I think we all have an idea from media, not necessarily always from professional psychologists about burnout. And I think sometimes maybe we use that word a little bit too liberally, if you will. So what does that actually mean? Do you need to be diagnosed by a clinician, or how can you spot the early signs if you're someone who's not necessarily dealt with that before?
Yeah. So burnout syndrome can be diagnosed by a doctor, and that usually means you really don't care about work anymore. You're absolutely exhausted. You don't care about any of the people you were working with. You're so detached from life, and it's very hard to get out of bed. Very hard. Just absolute exhaustion. And when you get to that stage, it's a bit of a build back to recovery. But early on, there are signs. There are what I call level 1 signs. Level 1 signs are, 1, you start saying to yourself, if I just push harder, I'll get through this. That's sign number 1. Sign number 2 is if, you start to really work harder and harder and harder, just to make sure I'll get better and better and better. And you sound really motivating and really highly engaged, but you're just pushing yourself. You stop exercising as much, your nutrition goes to pot, and you start working harder. Then the third sign of level 1 is deniability. Everyone asks you how you are, and I'm great. You sure? I'm absolutely fantastic, but you're trying to convince yourself you're okay.
Sort of stage 4 is when you completely collapse, or
Yeah. So stage 1 is that. Stage 2 is you start to feel a wee bit unsure, you start to feel tired, you start to disengage, you start to question and mistrust your colleagues and your manager.
Hmm.
Stage 3 is really when you're exhausted, and 4 is you're off work sick. You can't get
And
out of
that's it.
bed, you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
function.
And is it always to do with work? Can you get burnout from other things? For example, if you, I don't know, your mom looking after a household with, I don't know, a couple of children, or, is there anything else? Does it always have to be related to work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you can get burnout from anything. So, quite often, if you are a new mum and you have lots of responsibility with children or you're caring for elderly relatives, you can hit burnout just as much as anyone else. Because when you have new
Mm.
children, quite often your sleep is disturbed extensively. And that is usually one of the things that can, I always think sleep's the main driver of burnout, far more than the others.
Mm. Yeah, because you mentioned a few things. You mentioned nutrition, you mentioned sleep. So is that really the two most common triggers? I'm just trying to understand more the physiology of it because, we all think about it as mental exhaustion, but there are physical signs as well.
Definitely. And that, again, another really good point. So, in terms of there are 4 pillars I think that lead to burnout. The first one I always say is the foundation, which is your sleep. When that starts to suffer, it's very hard to eat well when you're tired. People tend to go for pizzas, junk food when they're tired. And then, do you really want to go to the gym when you feel tired? Not as much as when you feel awake. So that's why I always say sleep is like the foundations of your house. Nutrition is like one wall, and exercise is the next wall. But the roof that keeps everything watertight and safe is your mindset. Okay, so sleep is the foundation. What you eat is the wall, and then you've got your exercise. And again, exercise doesn't need to be pumping iron, going to the gym, running everywhere.
Mhm.
Just it can be walking, it can be doing things in the countryside, enjoying pursuits, whatever you like to do. What tends to happen is the sleep gets disrupted and it starts to shake these two walls. So nutrition and exercise are usually the first things to start to shake. And what happens is your mindset starts to alter dramatically because there's no stability in your house. Basically, the roof is trying to keep it together, but because nutrition, exercise, and sleep are not working, your mindset starts to change dramatically, and then from there, the house just tumbles.
And I almost feel like sometimes, as you say, there could be stages, or it could be just as the case with a physical injury. It's not really going to look after even a small injury. It could easily become into something bigger if you don't pay attention to it. And it feels to me that there are periodic, maybe times in our life where we might be exhausted, a little bit sleep deprived, maybe because of travel or something that happened. And if it's continuing over that, it sounds to me like it's easier to manage. But I wonder if you've seen cases in your practice where a little bit of lack of focus or attention, or that mindset not being there, not paying attention to what's going on, and it all like an avalanche just sweeps you, and before you know it, it's a fully blown burnout.
Just I have seen that in the past, particularly with high performing individuals who believe they can push through absolutely anything. So your top 20% performers who tend to have a really good mindset believe that they can overcome any hurdle and continue to push and push and push and push until and haven't noticed that their mindset is altered dramatically. They are neglecting themselves, neglecting their team, neglecting others. Quite often in manager positions or leadership positions, they tend to be more likely to suffer from burnout. And quite often they don't even notice that they're in here listening to the internal dialogue rather than being in the room and seeing what's happening. And everyone else can see that they're degrading and things are changing, but they don't see it until it really whacks them and they're off work for 6 months. And that's quite a common thing to happen, particularly to high performers.
Mm. Yeah, and you made me think about when you said others spotted first. It must be obvious to the outsider, and that's often the case with many things. So if we see a colleague or friend or family member who's we suspect is going through something like that, what can we do to help? Because it sounds
Yeah,
like they
so
might not want to listen.
you know, it's asking them, are you okay? Right? Are you really okay? And then when they start, because what they will do is go into defense mode and try to
Hmm.
justify how well they are. And, it's okay to say, look, I know you quite well. And this is different behaviour from what I'm used to seeing. And usually when you get behaviour change like that, there's something behind it. It might be worth you maybe speaking to someone. I'm sure you have professionals. Your company has some sort of policy or practice with a professional that you can speak to, just to have a conversation and find out if there's something else going on. And they might not listen to you at the time, but trust me, they will go away and think about it. And quite often I find most of them access some sort of help, contact their EAP if they've got Bupa mental health, whatever their organisation or they privately have, or even speaking to your GP, they will be able to redirect you to get someone just to speak to or run some tests to find out if you're starting that process. Because when they do the biometrics of your blood, they will find things that have changed from your normal blood profile. They can show
Yeah,
that
cortisol and all these stress hormones, probably. Yeah.
absolutely cholesterol levels change, your predisposition to diabetes gets higher. When you're burned out, there is a whole load of health indicators that start to come into play.
Yeah, because we often think about it just as a mental health condition, but as you say, it is all connected. But I want to go back a little bit because you didn't mention high performance, and I thought that was interesting because we are always taught that, we have to persevere and, the people who actually succeed are the ones who don't give up. And I think in many cases it's true. You try 10 times, the 11th is the one when you succeed, whether you're an entrepreneur or manager, whatever business you may be in, whatever it is, it's just do not give up. And most of my guests, when I ask them at the end, what would you say? They'll say, start sooner, do not give up, believe in yourself, which is great. I think that's exactly the message. So where is that fine line and how do you know when you've overstepped the border?
You do need to push through, right? But that thin line is when your eating changes, you increase exercise or you decrease exercise, okay, significantly. That is when that's the first indicators that something's not quite right. And for example, you can push through and continue because I am somebody who pushes through and continues, right? Because I don't give up but I know when my diet changes, my alcohol consumption increases, or I'm not doing any exercise, something's not right. So I might press pause, do some analysis, look at my mindset, think about it. Where am I really, 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 really not what I'm telling people? And then address those nutrition factors, those exercise factors, and then I start again, straight back on.
When you said pause the button and reset your mind, I think it's easy to say, but I'm sure there's some people out there thinking, oh, well, how do I do that? What does that actually mean? What does it take?
Of course. So, I mean, for me, what I do is what I recommend to other people, well, what calms your mind? So some people reading a really nice book calms their mind. I tend to meditate. I love meditation. And when I'm really tired, I'll do guided meditation. So again, it's whether it's yoga, walking in green spaces. We know forest bathing, so just spending time or walking through a lovely park can make a huge difference. And also taking time to go, what do I really want? Am I on the right path? Is this really what I want? And don't think about it too much. Just write down what comes first to mind. And again, just taking time to let your thoughts run wild. Because what people try to do is try to be busy. And I won't think about those things that are really bothering me. Whereas if you just stop and listen to them. So as someone who has done work on my own internal dialogue, I have improved it significantly. And when it tells me something that I know it's just not true, I will say internally, not out loud, because people might think I'm a bit strange if I do that in the street, but to myself, I'll say, well, that's simply not true. What evidence do you have for that? And there's no evidence, it's all false. And it just starts to fall away. But unless I listened to it and I knew what it was saying, how would I be able to deal with it?
We're excellent manipulators of our own minds. I think you started something, you feel like you should be doing it, but at some point that sound of breaking glass moment when the penny drops, and you're thinking, well, actually, I'm not sure if that's all to it. Maybe I want to be doing something different, or I want to be doing something that gives me some additional satisfaction. You ended up where you are now because you went through a similar experience yourself.
I certainly was sitting as a senior HR professional, sitting opposite people and thinking, why are we letting this person go? There's something not quite right. Superstar performer for, 5 years. Last year's been a bit of a disaster. What happened? What happened at that point? And I realized, well, I don't know how to handle this. And this person needs me to handle this brilliantly because this is their career, their life, and I've got a position of power and I should do this properly. And I realized, people kept telling me I was highly emotionally intelligent and empathetic. And I thought, well, I'm just going to retrain as a psychologist. So I applied for a psychology degree. I did it full time whilst I was working full time. And then I did a master's and I'm now doing my chartership. So it has completely changed me. And now when people say things to me, managers will say to me, well, this person's not performing. I'll say, well, just stop a minute. Were they performing before? What's happened? And then I'll have that conversation with them to say, okay, what's going on? And then 9 times out of 10, I'm referring them to a psychological support outside the organisation. And then the vast majority, I would say 90%, make a full recovery and back at work, performing in 6 months. Now, we could have lost that person. They could have lost their job, been ill, but they stayed with us. We supported them, integrated them back into the organisation in a really nice stepped way. And they came back and they were great when they came back. And, the engagement levels, because we had actually listened, supported and nurtured that person back to work, it made a huge difference.
And I'm curious also to go a little bit into your own personal story there, because you weren't, as you said, always in HR or even a psychologist. Your career started a little bit differently, and you've also been very open about being neurodivergent. So I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about what that experience was like, and whether that affected your ultimate choice of a career to dedicate your time to.
Yeah, so I suppose I really started my career full on in a company called Accenture, where I ended up being a change manager. And I think at that point, I mean, when I talk about burnout, I'm not talking about it as somebody who's absolutely perfect, because if I look back at my career, I was so driven to deliver and make money for clients that I must have burned people out. I'm pretty sure I did. And, one of my bosses definitely took me aside and said, yeah, you hit your target, you delivered for the client, it was on time, it was in budget, but you've left a trail of disaster behind you. Most of your people are absolutely knackered. And, I kind of thought, I was in the women's fast track process, and she said, you're not going to go any further unless you do something about that. So I did. And it was during that time I found out that I had dyslexia. I always knew that there was something not quite right, and I was definitely neurodivergent. And I got the diagnosis, and then there wasn't a lot of support then as much as there is now. So now I have had extensive support in the workplace and at university. So I just had to live with it, and I learned lots of strategies to reread things, to work harder than everyone else. And it just was too much, if I'm going to be honest. The contractual changes, the reviews, I was working 7 till 7, trying to make sure I got the language right, because it's detrimental if you don't get the language right. And then another time I just was outright bullied by someone, and I worked harder and harder and harder. But the sabotage behind my back of my reputation, my capability was a lot, and I hit burnout at that point also.
And I really appreciate you being that upfront about it, because I think it's a good reminder that even if you are now on the other side helping others, you've been and you've experienced in a way that probably almost enhances your ability to empathize and help others. But the bullying thing is something that struck me, because I know when you and I had a conversation earlier, you said something that was interesting to me and that I've tried to apply, which is not always easy, which is to try and understand where the bullies are coming from. Because I think in common culture, when we decide or declare someone being a bully, then they're sort of marginalized, or, we say, oh, I'm not even going to engage with that person, they're a bully. And, there isn't really, I don't think there are many people who try and understand what makes somebody a bully, what's their motivation, where they're coming from. So I wonder what your thoughts were on this.
And I completely agree, because I think that bullies themselves, if you were to listen to their internal dialogue, you'd be incredibly grateful you were not them. So I have spoken to some people who are bullies, and they have told me about their thinking patterns. And I've thought, wow, yeah, okay, now I understand why you behave the way you behave and what's going on. And when for example, if you're a middle manager, you have pressure from leadership, you're competing with your peers to get to leadership, and then you have your employees pushing up. You're in the center here, getting pushed from all angles. And sometimes what works is being authoritarian and very dynamic and driving people. And, one person will think that's okay, and another person will think that's bullying. So what you also have is the individual person's perception of what's going on, as well as what the person's actually doing. But there are people who outright bully and actually quite enjoy playing games with people. So I'm not saying everyone is is really struggling. Some people actually get a lot of energy out of doing it and kind of enjoy it. And they're a whole different group of people that I would push to the side at the moment. But the vast majority of them, I think, are people who are really struggling themselves, and actually blaming them and projecting blame at them is not going to work. With some people, what I have done when they've started the game playing is I have said to them, okay, what's that about and why are you doing it? And having an open conversation with someone saying, are you okay? Because what just happened there indicates to me that something's perhaps not quite right. Quite often, just a floodgate opens and a whole load of things start coming out. And once you realise what's really going on for that person, you see it completely differently. They're not deliberately trying to bully someone. Sometimes they're just trying to cope with what's going on in here.
So it's a coping mechanism of sorts, which is not how we always think about it. And yes, I think they're definitely the ones who get satisfaction out of it. And as you say, that's a slightly different case. But I think that's a very useful tip perhaps for our listeners, because I'm sure everyone's been in a situation where you get shouted at, or, someone really oversteps, I suppose, the way you expect it to be treated. And again, everyone's expectations could be different. So I think the natural reaction tends to be one of either reacting with more aggression or internalizing it and then going away and not really expressing it on the spot at the time, which sounds like the best way of actually dealing with it when you're in the moment.
If you can, but not everyone feels confident enough to do it at that point, and that's okay, because what you can do afterwards, and what I have advised people to do and what I have done myself, is say, the other day when that happened, this is how I interpreted what happened. Am I correct in my thinking? And what you'll notice there is I took absolute responsibility for my perception of what happened, and asked them, is that what happened? And that type of approach opens the door for them to say, no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was this. And that can just make you feel so much better, because what you've walked away with was not what they intended. And it just can clear something up in a nanosecond, the next day or a week later. It doesn't matter when you do it. What matters is you do it, and don't beat yourself up about it.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's the kind of tip that you could give not just to anyone dealing with colleagues or managers or your bosses or whatever it may be, but that's actually something you can use with friends or neighbors or any kind of conflict situation. But I want to go back to Burn Bright because I know that's an exciting project for you. And what is interesting is that you're not just doing that, you are still having your job, which is not a secret. And I think that's very, very interesting because we often, again, when we talk about careers, we think that there's only one thing or another. I have to choose in order to do something that I think I'm going to enjoy. I have to drop everything else. I'm not fully dedicated if I'm not doing this. And, I think it's quite easy to get into some of these patterns that you talked about in the beginning of pushing and trying hard with thoughts and then exhausting yourself. So I'm always interested in asking this question. You think that you can have more than one careers and certainly more than one at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I really look after myself in a really big way. I'm very careful with my mindset. I do continual work every week to improve my mindset and make sure it's absolutely alive. I do lots of things to maintain my energy. I eat well, I fast, I sleep well. There's nothing that will stop me prioritizing my sleep. Nothing gets in the way of that. I will always give it 100% to sleep well. So that means I have a wake up strategy and I go to bed strategy. So when I'm going to bed, the lights go low. I don't watch television. I sit. I relax. I'll have conversations. I have a pattern that I follow to go to bed. I'm quite strict about these things, and I don't deviate unless I'm on holiday. But I don't deviate from them too much because it gives me absolute energy to do everything. So I can do my day job and I can do my business as my side hustle, as I call it, and do them both well. I do public speaking, I'm doing podcasts. I can fit this all in because I don't watch television anymore and I don't miss it.
And what's the wake up strategy? Because I think that's the one that I've personally struggled more than the evening strategy.
I do tend to get up earlier than I would if I just let myself naturally get up. So I'll get up 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'll do a meditation, an energizing meditation in the morning. I will do like a 15-minute HIIT exercise program, and then get a shower, do my hair, my makeup. I'll do that every morning, get dressed. Even if I'm sitting in the house, I'll still do my hair, my makeup and get dressed because for me, it's a kind of mindset thing. And it helps me to get really switched on for what I'm about to do during the day. And I adjust it according to what I'm doing, of course. But I never, ever not meditate. I always do it. And if I'm in a rush, because occasionally I do sleep in, I'll do it in the train. So I've learned to meditate standing up, sitting down. I can do it anywhere now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think most people who might be listening can say, "Oh, I don't have time," and when do you really fit all that, and this and that, and excuses. But it doesn't need to take that long, and you don't really need to go out of your way, as you illustrating with your example here.
Yeah, and
Um,
if I can only do 5 minutes, I'll do 5 minutes, right? If I can only
and not
do
beat myself up about it, because I think that's the other thing that I tend to do in many of my peers. Oh, I didn't do the perfect program, and today I didn't do the meditation. Therefore, it sends you almost in this spiral of beating yourself up because for one day you didn't follow that pattern. God forbid, you know.
but that's okay, right? Because life's imperfect. It's imperfect. We're adjusting, adapting to new things, new technology, new experiences. There's so much happening in that external world. You have to go, well, today I did the best I could, and that is good enough.
That's very important. So finally, before we end, I just wanted to an opportunity again to tell us a bit more about Burn Blind if people wanted to get in touch with you, maybe because something that we talked about resonated and they want to find out more. What's the best way, and how are you hoping that the business is going to grow in the future?
So you can contact me via LinkedIn if that's the easiest way for you. My contact details are all on there, my mobile phone. I have a website as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. It's all there. I always get back to people pretty much within 24 hours.
I can confirm that is accurate. She does. And that's how we met. But can we also reveal a little, I don't think it's a secret necessarily, but you have your own podcast as well. I don't know if that's still in the making, but can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I think that's going to be quite interesting when it comes out.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm doing starting recordings now, and we are looking. I'm speaking to specialists a lot of the time, so clinical psychologists, educational psychologists, doctors, and senior lecturers at different universities. And what we're doing is we're talking about the physical aspects of burnout, the psychological aspects of burnout, the latest research, and keeping people informed about, okay, how much of burnout is your mindset and how much of burnout is your external environment? And can you mix that up so that you don't burn out? And we want to explore what's the boundaries. And if we change this, will it get better? Will it stop it? And we're going to explore how you can find out the best things that work for you so that you can prevent burnout, because the ultimate is prevention, because that's what I'm all about. Let's prevent it and let's change your mindset so it never happens again.
I love that. So burn bright, not out. That's your motto. Fantastic.
Definitely.
And if you could share one message at the end for anyone who's listening, I know you called your burn bright side hustle. I think it's a bit more than that now. But what would you say to anyone who's looking to go into side hustle? What can they take from your story?
Would say, I suppose it's a lot like others. Be brave, be bold, don't listen to what other people say, and take care of yourself. Do not ever deprioritize self-care for anyone.
I think that's what we all need to hear once in a while. Wendy, thank you so much for this. I know it's going to be very useful to our listeners, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been absolutely wonderful.
I really hope that you enjoyed this episode with Wendy as much as I did. And honestly, I re-listened to it after a couple of weeks, maybe after recording it. And then I couldn't stop using some of the quotes and the tips that she gave in the recording to my colleagues and friends, or just anyone going through a little bit of a rough patch. And I think it's just fantastic that she gave so many practical tips. She literally, as I'd like to say, hit the nail on the head, exactly to the point. So I hope that you will take some of those away. But one of the major themes or parts of our conversation that really stuck with me, probably for a week after I listened to that, was when she said, if it gets a little bit noisy in your head, why don't you ask yourself that question, especially when you're trying to sabotage yourself and you're not being kind to yourself and you're telling yourself all those horrible things and pushing yourself as a result to work harder and harder and keep trying and questioning and doubting and starting all over again and working more, longer hours. What proof do you have? And that is very powerful, at least for me, because especially late in the evenings when you could get a bit more tired, the what I call lower emotions start to creep up and run wild in my head. And I start to doubt, including with this podcast, with any role, my role at work, at home. Am I good enough? Is this all worth it? Or who's going to care? Who's going to listen? How am I going to cope? There's just so much to be done. And then I just tell myself, wait, I have a plan. I don't have to schedule everything. The reality is things change all the time. So trying to focus too much on planning and scheduling and working hard, I found for myself is just a pure waste of time. And if you can be honest with yourself, how many times have you got yourself just making long plans of when you're going to do everything and scheduling this in the morning and that in the afternoon and that in the evening? And at some point, at least I've got myself that I spent nearly an hour making that perfect plan. And guess what? I could have used that hour to get some sleep. I could have used that hour to spend it with my family. I could have used that hour to actually get on with things. So I wonder why we always like to overcomplicate. And I wanted to share a personal experience that I had over the weekend. It was Japanese calligraphy class, which I really enjoyed. And I must admit, I went into that. I was part of a meditation class that a dear friend of mine, who's probably going to be one of our next guests, offered. And that was a new experience. I've never done anything to do with calligraphy before. And it was just fascinating learning about it. And one of the principles that I really liked was that you can only make that stroke once with the brush. And there's a specific order, of course, in which you have to do things. But If you've done it, you can't go back, you can't scratch, you can't repeat it, you can't make it thicker. It's just not how it works. And at first I thought, well, surely they're not going to catch me. But guess what? The master would always know. And I think that's the same. It's a nice metaphor for what we often do in our lives. We often think who's going to know, but we do know. And I think that's just a very nice reminder again, to stop obsessing with the past and just focus on what we can do about things in the present moment or in the future. But certainly the past is there, it's done. You've done the stroke on the piece of paper and you can't undo it. So what's the point in worrying about it and going over and trying to fix it? I think as women, we often find ourselves driven by that desire to help. It's, a natural impulse. It's something that's part of our DNA, to help, to fix things, to fix what we've done, to fix others, to fix the society. And that just gets so tiring. So I'll probably dedicate an entire other episode to the Japanese art of mindfulness, because I think we have a lot to learn from that culture. And recently I came across a brilliant little pocketbook called Ikigai by Yukari Mitsuhashi. So I would definitely recommend that as a starting point if you're looking to bring a little bit of joy and meaning to your everyday routine. And, I agree with you. Sometimes these things are simple enough to say and not always easy enough to do. So I find that what plays a key role in moving from just saying things or thinking things to actually doing them is self-awareness. And this is exactly what my next guest on the show, Jan Rees, specializes in. So Jan is a communication skills expert who helps her clients find out what truly makes them who they are. So if, like me, you want to find out why you get on better with some people rather than others, don't miss our next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Sound of Breaking Glass. I truly appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any new episodes. They drop every 2 weeks. I'd also love for you to join me over on Instagram, on LinkedIn, where I share more behind the scenes moments, guest insights, and extra resources just for our amazing Breakers community. Let's keep the conversation going, and I can't wait to connect with you there. Until next time, take care and keep breaking through.